It's rarely a good sign in a game when you're deposited into a large cavernous area, a puzzle in front of you, and you have no idea what to do. There's a raised platform with unusual contraptions that you can interface with, but they don't really do anything, and there are some grey corridors that lead to other machines before circling back. I surmise that the goal was to open a pair of great doors at the end of the cavern, but honestly, this puzzle could have been anything. While it turned out that I was right about opening the doors, the path to getting them open proved tortuously convoluted. However, the good news is that I never got so stuck again. This first section is partially bamboozling because it introduces so many unfamiliar concepts that have no obvious order. In the rest of the game, while the subdued colour scheme can make orientation tricky, the level design tends to funnel you towards objectives and narrows down the number of pieces in play at once. The opening of Scorn thus acts as a kind of unwritten warning to less committed travellers. Gaming's version of the inscription above the gates of hell in Dante's Inferno. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. There is another reason for Scorn's obtuse start though, one that's hinted at all over the walls and caverns and beyond. From the first reveal of this first-person horror game, it's been clear that developer Ebb Software was inspired by the artwork of Hans Ruder Geiger, best known for his creature and ship designs on the film Alien. H.R. Geiger's surreal airbrush paintings depict fusions of organic matter and machines in a way that doesn't translate into ordinary, rational experience, and everything about Scorn aims to sustain that otherworldly atmosphere. Admittedly, the architecture of Scorn's unnamed planet mimics Geiger's style to a point that feels near plagiaristic, but still, the effect is stunning. Scorn's washed-out palette helps in blurring the lines between constructs of metal, bone and flesh. Ominous protrusions flash back to the infamous xenomorph's terrifying mouth within a mouth. Columns extend from ceilings like skeletal tarantula legs. In quiet moments, which are frequent in this slow-paced horror experience, you feel like you could be browsing a macabre art exhibition. However, these aren't mere frescoes, and Scorn's environments are equally full of texture. As a first-person experience, you mostly only see the hands of your character, and the camera likes to savor manual actions, imploring you to imagine the sensations. Switches are pulled by inserting your fingers into a row of fleshy, squelchy holes, for instance, then pulling down, stretching the warm outer skin. In many other cases, you end up with blood on your hands, literally as well as figuratively. The putrefying visual feast is not merely a photocopy of Geiger's work then, and because of that, Scorn captures a sense of place that's truly alien, in that nothing here chimes with our social, linguistic, or technological touchstones to bed us into this reality. Whereas in most games, extraterrestrials are either monsters or humanoids with oddly shaped heads and concerns much like our own, Scorn's alienness is incomprehensible, like that in Solaris or Arrival, and its wordless opacity is part of the effect. Even the main character is largely impenetrable, a being that's sort of but not quite human, offered without name, identity, or backstory. In fact, the bigger picture behind this system will never become clear, but working out how individual parts work is often motivating enough, and ultimately Scorn's mechanics are anchored in our own gaming reality. Even in that first cavern, the concept of a door and a switch-based lock is familiar, even if the mechanics aren't, while a machine that might have been anything from a toilet to a torture device turns out to be a kind of rail cart. Translating the twisted designs into more conventional gates, lifts, and levers is part of the fun here, and puzzle pieces usually reveal themselves to be neatly arranged once you make the required leap. The same process applies when you pick up new equipment. For instance, while a bone-shelled mass of wriggling pulp that could have escaped from a David Cronenberg movie turns out to be a weapon. Once the latter is in your grip, the middle chunk of Scorn dilutes into puzzles to accommodate battles against an infestation of lumbering flesh sacks. At first, your firearm is more akin to a handheld pile driver that pumps out a metal rod, forcing you to engage enemies up close. Eventually, you can switch that out for a shotgun appendage, then a powerful cannon, although ammo is scarce for both. Encounters are more like survival horror than FPS then, with individual monsters capable of causing big problems. Sadly, as much as that suits the context and adds some tension to your exploration, the logistics of fighting are unreasonably cumbersome. Slow movement, tight spaces, and uneven scenery often combine to provide little means to avoid projectiles and plenty of opportunities to snag on jutting furniture. The weapons, meanwhile, are hefty and slow to recharge, so each shot has to count, but it's hard to judge their effective range, so you might charge forward and leave yourself exposed as an assault fails to connect. Maybe the intent was to emulate the clumsiness of using such strange tools, but that would have been a generous interpretation of Scorn's weakest systems. It is worth persevering, however, into an engrossing final act that dials up the body horror to a degree that would satisfy Geiger's Xenomorph itself. Yet even more notable is that, when presented with one last grand multi-part puzzle, you no longer feel bewildered and lost. Rather, confronted with new forms of bizarre machinery, their function no longer seems overtly obscure. While you still have little idea about the higher powers at work behind Scorn's world, the links between its pieces have become perfectly logical. The confusion and frustration dissipate as you realize you're slowly but surely assimilating into this horrifying existence, and perhaps that was the purpose all along. This is a violent, painful, but fascinating place, thick with symbolism and interlocking puzzles that hint at some terrifying grand design. While it can be overly obscure and frustrating, especially with its combat, Scorn serves up one hell of a journey. We give it 3.5 out of 5.